Any input you give me would be great. Really? Really? I have a cat. Hey, comrades. Uh, my name's Jacq, and welcome back to The Book Bugs. Today I thought I'd do a mid-year wrap-up. It's late middle of July right now when I'm filming. I thought I'd go over what I've read so far over, this half of the year, and then I talk about what I want to read by the year's end, because I have quite a few of those, and so maybe if I make this, it'll hold me accountable. So, real quick, the system that I use to keep track of my reading is an app called Storygraph. I know there are a lot of people who like to use Goodreads, and I used to be one of them, and then I found out that Goodreads is owned by Amazon. And perhaps you can tell from my greeting, I'm very anti-capitalist. Jeff Bezos is my enemy. He doesn't know who I am. I know who he is, and I can't say that I care for him. I try and use Amazon as little as possible. So when I can use another application that isn't owned by Amazon, I will try and do that, which is why I really love Storygraph. I use Storygraph, and it's not owned by Amazon. It's an ad-free, independent application and website that you can keep track of your books on, just like Goodreads. So, without further ado, I guess, I will get into discussing what I've read so far this year. I know you can't see it, but if you see me looking down like this, I have my iPad down here and I'm just pulling up my stats on the app so I don't get anything wrong. So far this year, I have read 90 books, 31,997 pages. That's very fun. They've all been fiction books. I want to try and get into reading more nonfiction. I have a ton of memoirs and nonfiction, biographies and autobiographies sitting on my shelf, and I just haven't gotten around to reading them yet. I'm setting a goal right now. Read at least 2 nonfiction books by the end of 2023. When it comes to the format breakdown. Again, if you're not into data, you may not be into any of this information. I just thought I'd provide it for those of you who are interested. I have read 17% of my books in print, 48% of my books digitally, which is ebooks, and then 36% of my books have been audiobooks. I think that's wild because I feel like I've read a lot more print books than I have audiobooks because I own a ton of print books and I also own a ton of digital books. But I own a ton of print books. I don't own really any audiobooks. I think I have a couple on Chirp, which is a discounted audio book website and app. It's great. I guess I mostly check out my audiobooks from the library, and I also use this great service called Scribd. It is a website and application where you pay a monthly subscription fee, and you get access to all of the ebooks and audiobooks on their platform. Now, their selection isn't the greatest. They don't have everything. I don't think they keep up with the newest releases, but they do have a lot of books. And if you're someone like me who, one, doesn't want to buy audiobooks but really enjoys audiobooks, or two, reads a lot of books and you don't want to buy every one of those audiobooks but your library also doesn't have them, I would consider checking it out. It's a thing that makes sense for me if you're someone who struggles finding time for reading, so you don't necessarily devour as many books as I do, then it probably isn't worth it. I believe it's $12.99 per month. Now, as far as my most read authors go, I'm working through the Eloisa James collection. So I've read 16 books written by her. I think she's been mostly audiobooks. She writes historical romances. I'm very much into those. You won't see a ton in my shelves here, and that's mostly because I get most of them digitally. I only try to buy books that I know I'm going to be rereading. So a lot of those historical romance books I will check out from the library or use Scribd. My second most read author is Sabrina Jeffries. Same situation. She writes historical romances. Both of these authors write spicy historical romances, by the way, just so you know. And then my third most read author is Tessa Dare. Again, historical romance writer. I don't know what you want me to say. I have a problem, and her name is Bodice River Romances. Okay, the month I read the most books in was May. I read a total of 25 books in the month of May, and I read over 8,000 pages. So now let's get into what books I actually read, which I'm sure is what most of you came here for. So far this year, 3 of the books that I've read have been 5-star books for me. Now, if you're wondering what my rating system is, it is very subjective. I would say that if it's over 4 stars for me, it means that it is excellent. It made me feel the whole spectrum of emotions. It elicited like a physical response in me, whether that's me laughing out loud, whether that's me actually crying. So that's over 4 stars. Now, to get the coveted 5-star rating, it needs to be something that I'm also going to be able to and will be rereading. So, let's get into what those 5-star books actually were. So, you're going to notice a theme with these books, and I don't know what you want me to say about it. So, my first 5-star read, I read finished it on January 19th, and that was The Bookish Life of Nina Hale by Abby Waxman. So, why did The Bookish Life of Nina Hale deserve 5 stars? So I read it a while ago, and I'm a mess who doesn't type in reviews. I just kind of put the star rating down, so if I miss anything, editing me will probably put something in to correct it. Okay, before I get into the actual review of it, I am going to read to you the description of this book. Nina has her life just as she wants it. A job in a bookstore, an excellent trivia team, and a cat named Phil. If she sometimes suspects there might be more to life than reading, she just shrugs and picks up a new book. So when the father she never knew existed dies, leaving behind innumerable sisters, brothers, nieces, and nephews, Nina is horrified. They all live close by. She'll have to speak to strangers. And if that wasn't enough, Tom, her trivia nemesis, has turned out to be cute, funny, and interested in getting to know her. It's time for Nina to turn to her own fresh page and find out if real life can ever live up to fiction. So I remember that this book literally made me laugh out loud, and I believe this book also made me cry a little bit around the climax, the all is lost moment. I also really related to Nina, the protagonist, just because she's someone who always found her comfort in books, and so she was lonely and she didn't strive to make those connections, and she got all of her emotional support from her books. So as someone who experiences and has, been dealing with social anxiety for as long as I can remember, and has used books as like my coping mechanism and as my escape, I really related to her as a character. I get it. When life is hard, you dive into books and you find your comfort and your solace there. Problems are always resolved in books. Life isn't full of perfect little wrap-up endings, but books always have them. In cases where you really just need that escape, books will kind of always be there. Am I oversharing? I don't know. Maybe. I'm also a sucker for a good romantic subplot. The romance isn't the main focus of this book, but as you heard in the description, there is a rivals to lovers subplot where Nina is getting to know and falling for and crushing on her trivia nemesis, which I thought was very cute and very fun. There was also the very compelling main plot line of Nina meeting these family members that she didn't know she had. I was really invested in that and really invested in Nina kind of getting to know her family. Nina inherited a family that she didn't even know she wanted and didn't even know she was missing, and it was messy and chaotic, and sometimes she hated them, but they were family. As someone with a large family, her finding and sometimes hating but ultimately appreciating her family was something really fun. The second 5-star book that I've read so far this year is The Lonely Hearts Book Club by Lucy Gilmore. I read this one on June 3rd, and obviously I gave it 5 stars. So let me read you the description. Sloane Parker lives a small, contained life as a librarian in her small, contained town. She never thinks of herself as lonely, but still she looks forward to that time every day when old curmudgeon Arthur McLaughlin comes to browse the shelves and cheerfully insult her. Their sparring is such a highlight of Sloane's day that when Arthur doesn't show up one morning, she's instantly concerned. And then another day passes. And another. Anxious, Sloane tracks the old man down only to discover him all but bedridden, and desperately struggling to hide how happy he is to see her. Wanting to bring more cheer into Arthur's gloomy life, Sloane creates an impromptu book club. Slowly, the lonely misfits of their sleepy town begin to find each other, and in their book club, find the unlikely joy of unlikely friendship. Because, as it turns out, everyone has a special book in their heart, and a reason to get lost and eventually found within the pages. This book obviously made me have actual emotions. Very similar to Nina Hill, I actually laughed out loud at certain parts of this book, and I definitely cried at several points with this book. So this book actually, even though it doesn't sound like it from the description, features 5 different POVs. Each POV character has their own section that they narrate, and the POV characters are obviously the main characters. So you start off with Sloane, who's the one mentioned in the description. Then it switches over to Maisie, who's the second member of the Lonely Hearts Book Club. Then it switches over to Mateo, another member of the Lonely Hearts Book Club and Sloane's co-worker at the library. And then it goes to Arthur, who's the old man mentioned in the description who, lightly bullies Sloane. I lied. I just said there were 4 POV characters, and there's actually a 5th character who gets his own POV. That's Greg. He's Arthur's grandson who comes to take care of him, and even though nothing happens between them, he's the love interest for Sloane. There's chemistry between them, and the implication is that once you close the book and finish it, they get together. So that's really cute. Like I said, I love a good romantic subplot. So I underlined a lot in this book, but one quote from early on in the beginning, just as Sloane and Arthur are getting into this disagreement. I guess it's less a quote and more a passage, but it's an exchange that they have. He paused long enough to turn back to me. When was the last time you cared about something so much you couldn't eat? He demanded. Or sleep? When have you ever felt the fire of life burn so bright that it hurts? When did you ever bother to fight for something you loved? When I didn't answer right away, Arthur snorted. That's what I thought. You may as well leave me be. I'm not your pet or your library mascot, and I'm definitely not your friend. All the air seemed to leave my lungs at once. I see you for what you are, he added. It's written on you as clearly as the words on a page. I shouldn't have asked. No good ever came from standing in front of someone and asking for the truth, especially when a person like me was doing the asking. I did it anyway. And what am I? An echo with nothing and no one to call her own, Arthur announced without preamble. Clearly, this was a subject he'd given some thought to. A friendly facade, an empty smile, a scared little girl without an opinion of your own, latching on to other people's bigger and brighter lives because you're not willing to fully live your own. I know that exchange is kind of upsetting, I guess, causes emotional turmoil, and it portrays Arthur as very mean. But I guess that really touched me because there is some truth in what Arthur says, and I know there was a time in my life when this was how I felt about myself. And I'm past that point now, but his words here, his mean, ill-intended words, really touched something inside of me. And again, it made me feel. And so if I'm crying on page 13 of your book, I don't know, I think that says something good about it. This book is full of great quotes. I think it has a lot of meaning. For me personally, very similar to the meaning of Nina Hill, living your life outside of books, connecting with other people, and showing how connection is really important. And it also plays on that whole found family trope, which is very fun. When it switches to different POV characters, you kind of get to see that these are all very different people. You have Sloane, who's relatively young. I think she's late 20s, and she's a librarian who winds up getting fired. You'll see that as you read it. And then you have Maisie, who's a housewife who's divorced, and her daughter essentially hates her and lives with her ex-husband, and she's desperate to build that relationship with her daughter. You have Mateo, who is Sloane's co-worker, and he's having some relationship struggles with his boyfriend, and he has issues with his mother because he was very similar to a pageant kid. He was forced to sing with his mother because he's really good at singing, but he was forced into that spotlight. And so as an adult, he's kind of working through that. And his mother also is very withholding. It's given him intimacy issues that he's trying to work through with his boyfriend. You have Greg, who's Arthur's grandson, who drops everything to come down and take care of his grandfather. And you find out throughout the book that Greg's mother is dead, and the grandfather's the only family he has left. His mother, Greg's mother, was estranged from Arthur, who is his mother's father. And you kind of find out why. You kind of see like a man trying to connect with this family that he's never really had an interest in connecting with because he doesn't have anyone else. And you also get to see this man like form actual like friendships with the other people in the Lonely Hearts book club. And finally you have Arthur himself. Grumpy old man gets sick. Throughout the book you're kind of questioning like what's going on with him, why is he like this, because there are a lot of like little hints that something happened that made him, I don't know if made him like this is the right term, but you get to the root of his rudeness and you learn why he's so reluctant to form relationships with other people. This book is all about how books can connect people who have nothing else in common except like a love of reading. And you know, as each member picks a new book for them to read, you kind of get to learn how they related to that book and what made that book so important. And it's, I guess, a study in those characters, which is fun and like emotional. And look, I just really like the book. Okay. So my last 5-star read so far this year was The Last Chance Library by Freya Sampson, which I read and finished on January 28th. Are you noticing the theme yet? I'll give you a hint. It is the subject of our YouTube channel. I don't know what you want me to say. I guess it's like, it's a trope I love. Books about people who love books. And maybe that's boring and whatever, but I just really love it when there are books about people who love books. Comment down below if you have any more book titles about book people, because I'll probably read it and love it and give it 5 stars. Description of The Last Chance Library. And I actually have the paperback of the book, so I'm going to read off of that. Lonely librarian June Jones has never left the sleepy English village where she grew up. Shy and reclusive, the 28-year-old would rather spend her time buried in books than venture out into the world. But when her library is threatened with closure, June is forced to step out from behind the shelves to save the heart of her community and the place that holds the dearest memories of her mother. Joining a band of eccentric yet dedicated locals in a campaign to keep the library, June opens herself up to people for the first time since her mother died. It just so happens that her old school friend Alex Chen is back in town and willing to lend a helping hand. The kind-hearted lawyer's feelings for her are obvious to everyone but June, who won't believe that anyone could ever care for her that way. To rescue the place and the books that mean so much to her, June must finally make some changes in her life. And maybe, in fighting for her cherished library, June can save herself too. I read this book with an audiobook, not this paperback, which I actually bought on Memorial Day, which we have a vlog of that showing our haul of all the stuff we got at Barnes & Noble that day, coming to you soon. Coming to you at some point. So I don't have any like highlighting or underline or notes that I can refer to in this book to like pull you some of my favorite quotes. And obviously, as you heard, I read this in January, so I don't remember what quotes were particularly meaningful to me. I can tell you that, much like the other books in my 5-star category, this book made me cry and laugh out loud. I remember really relating to June on a number of levels. And again, sucker for a romantic subplot. I don't know how many times I need to say that, but I think pretty much every book that I like rated above 4 stars is gonna have a romantic subplot, and I don't know what you want me to do about that. A romantic subplot or it's just a romance book itself. I know what I like, right? So I really I loved this book, and I can't even tell you what specifically I loved because I read it so long ago. I just remember how this book made me feel, which was good. It made me feel seen, and at those like emotional climaxes, it made me emote alongside the character. That's not an easy thing to do. Like, it takes talent to write a book that makes your readers emote with the characters that you're writing. I think that's pretty much all I can tell you about this book, again, because I didn't get a chance to like highlight or take notes or whatever in the actual copy since it was an audiobook. I just remember that this book made me emote, and if the synopsis or description is at all interesting to you, I'd recommend that you check this out from your library, give it a try. because I think if you're like me, you'll find that you really enjoy it. Maybe it's not 5 stars, but you'll like it. Okay, so that's it for the 5 star reads so far this year. I'm just gonna give you a couple of my other favorites from this year that didn't necessarily earn 5 stars, but were books that I really enjoyed and would like to see more people read and talk about. So the first one is actually one that I literally just finished, and I actually read it for a class, but I found that I really, really enjoyed it. So it's a graphic novel called The Greatest Thing by Sarah Winifred Searle. It's a YA coming of age graphic novel. I would be remiss if I didn't give you a content warning. The whole plot of this book is the main character coming to realize that, like, she's got some mental health issues. She has issues around food. There's a lot of like eating disorder type behavior in this book, which is identified as like problematic behavior, and the characters wind up getting help for. But content warning for the mental health stuff. There's like self-harm specific stuff. There's some like suicide mention, eating disorder, insomnia, verbally abusive parents, alcoholism, homophobia, biphobia, some gender dysphoria, some fat shaming and body shaming, and there's the briefest mention of an incident of what I would consider to be sexual assault. Again, not all of these things are described in explicit detail because they're not all things that the main character is going through. Some of it is like what her friends are going through, but I think it's important that readers go in knowing what they're getting, because I went into it thinking it was like lighthearted YA, coming of age, cute graphic novel, closer to some stuff that like Raina Telgemeier does. It deals with real issues, and I think that it's really important and it really touched something in me, but it's not for everyone, and I won't pretend that it is. Okay, so another one I want to mention that I read this year, because it was actually just released in February, so I read it on February 12th. It's called Not Your Ex's Hexes by April Asher. This is the second book in a series, the Supernatural single series. The first book is called Not the Witch You Wed. It's a great series, supernatural, rom-com, cute little romance. It's very funny. It is spicy, so if you don't want spice, don't do it. The main characters are witch triplets, and they're in like an urban fantasy contemporary setting. So it's like contemporary New York, but there's like a secret magical side of New York that we mortals don't get to see. So there are like shifters, vampires, angels, witches, obviously, demons, I think, and like a lot more. I really love it. It's one of my favorite series right now. I'm really excited for the third book to come out, which it will next year. She's very talented, and bonus, the witch triplets who are being followed, at least in the first 3 books, are 3 plus size women. That's very fun. We love plus size representation in romance books. And the third and final book that I want to mention, as I'm like seeing what books I read. Of course, I already listed in the beginning of the video some of my favorite historical romances that I read this year, but this one I think was my favorite that I've read so far this year that's been new, because I do a lot of rereads of books throughout the year. So I haven't been mentioning those rereads just because I feel like I should mention the books that I just read for the first time. So it was called When a Scot Ties the Knot by Tessa Dare. I read it on January 23rd. As you can see, I started off the year really well in terms of books. I read a lot of my favorites. I will just give you like a real quick plot rundown. I know I didn't do it for the other books, but this one is so freaking cute. Listen, when I read a good romance, I wind up like squealing, like because I'm so excited when the couple finally gets together, and it's a great moment. Other romance readers, you know what I'm talking about. To anyone else, I probably sound crazy. And that's fine. So, the female protagonist is socially anxious and doesn't want to go to a ball. She says that she's been like exchanging letters with this guy who's away at war. And then he like shows up years later, and she's kept up this lie that she's engaged to him. He shows up years later, and it turns out that this was a real person. Like, she just made up the guy and was forced to like write letters and send them out because when she told her family this, they were like keeping track of it. So it turns out she wrote down by happenstance the name of a real dude in the army, and he was receiving and reading all these letters that she wrote to him. And so they come to an agreement where basically they'll be affianced, they'll pretend to be getting to know each other after this long separation, and in the end of it, they'll break it off. She'll get her letters back, and like he'll be free and clear. Obviously, they fall in love, and it's real cute. And if you like historical romances set in that Regency era, England, Scotland time, would strongly recommend. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I took off that half a star, if I'm remembering correctly, just for like diversity issues. I think this book was written and published in 2012, but I don't necessarily think that's like an excuse that authors should lean on. You could always do with more diversity. Sarah McLean is one of my favorite historical romance authors, and she's always included diversity in her historical romances because, one, who cares if it's not period accurate? It's a bodice ripper romance, and we all know those things weren't happening as much as these books seem to say it was. Two, are you trying to tell me that LGBTQ plus people haven't been around? Do you think they were invented in 2016 when gay marriage was legalized? Like, are you trying to tell me people of color haven't always been around? Like, when people say that, I just think they're full of garbage. But Sarah McLean is really great at including people of color and including LGBTQ plus representation. I think they're mostly side characters and background characters, but I could be mistaken, and I don't want anyone to quote me on that. Either way, I'm gonna put some of my favorite books by her, like right here. She's great. I really love her. So that is my mid-year wrap-up. I already said that one of my goals is gonna be to read at least 2 nonfiction books before the end of the year. I also want to try and focus on reading more non-romance books because I have a lot of them, and what I tend to do is I read one romance book and then my brain just wants more and more romance books, so I go on this binge, and it becomes this cycle of binge reading romance books. It does like limit the scope of what I read, which is not something I want to do. I have a lot of books sitting on my TBR, books that I own sitting on my shelf that I'm staring at that I haven't read yet that are not romance books, and I want to try and read more of those. So I guess I don't have a numerical goal, but we'll see in like my end of the year 2023 wrap up if I have read more non-romance books than I have at this point. Let me know what books you've read so far in 2023. What have been your favorites? What have been your least favorites? Are there any books you would recommend to me, or any of the books I recommended to you any good? Like, have you read them? What did you think? I want to know any and everything about your bookish opinions. And if you want to see me do like an end of the year wrap up for 2023 in a similar style to this, please comment down below. You know, I'm always looking for feedback and input from you guys about what you want to see. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. So thank you guys for watching. Bye!